If you're in the synth pop, new wave, or electronic music like myself, I highly recommend you check out the group, The New Division. Today's guest is from The New Division, founding member John Kunkel. John, welcome to the podcast, dude. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you, Clif. I appreciate you guys having me on here. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Where you at, John?
So I'm actually based in Los Angeles, but I actually live in a city about an hour east called Redlands. But I was in LA for several years, and then we had a family, a couple of kids, and then moved out east to be closer to my wife's family and get some support with daycare and baby caring and all that good stuff.
Gotcha, man. How many kids do you have?
I got two. I have a daughter that's 3 named Frances, or Frankie as we call her.
Okay.
And then I have a son, Julian, who's 7 months right now.
Gotcha. I know you said you were in LA for a few years. How long were you actually in LA?
So we were out there for about 3.5 years, close to Hollywood and Miracle Mile, which is right next to like the LACMA, the Fairfax district. So kind of like right at the center of a lot of the entertainment, nightlife and all that kind of stuff, which was really fun. But, when you start having kids, it becomes really complicated to raise a family out there. And, I wanted more space. I wanted a studio. So we decided to move out here. And now I have an actual bedroom studio as opposed to having my studio in the living room of our apartment.
Very cool, man. How did you like LA when you lived there?
I mean, I loved it. I still love LA and I go out there all the time. As I mentioned, I'm only about an hour away, so I go there at least once a week for meetings. I also work at a studio out there in Hollywood called the Sound Factory, which is a really great studio where they did a lot of like the early Jackson 5 recordings, B-52s, a lot of iconic records in the 70s were done there. So I'm out there once a week, usually working about 10 to 12 hours on different projects. I work for a company called Splice right now, and so I do a lot of sample packs and recording with different musicians, producers, and so forth out of there.
So what does that mean, John? What exactly, I know you just told me, but kind of break that down for me, what you actually do with Splice. Explain that a little bit better if you could.
Yeah, of course. So at Splice, I'm a label manager, and so I work with one of 3 or 4 in-house labels, and we create what are called sample packs. And sample packs are essentially kind of like the building blocks that a lot of people will purchase to create songs. So, whenever you hear a song on the radio or a song from any artist that you like, you're probably hearing music that was either purchased or built with the sample pack, or it was partially constructed with like an idea, but then maybe somebody wanted to like, oh, I want a saxophone, but I don't have access to a saxophone. You can go to Splice and download a saxophone sample, royalty free, lay that onto your music, and boom, you have a track that maybe takes you back to the 80s with like a really cool 80s saxophone. There's vocal samples, there's guitar samples, live drum samples, synth samples, all kinds of different samples. And so my job is to produce and create those said samples that later will be sold on Splice and that people can purchase via a monthly subscription. So my role is really kind of like an A&R in a sense, but more so working with sound designers, musicians, vocalists, creators. At any given moment, I'm working with anywhere from 30 to 40 different sound designers and creators and vocalists to create that content that people can later download, purchase, and then insert that into their own tracks and productions.
Oh, very cool, man. How long have you been doing that?
So I've been in that industry for about 15 years. I started back in 2008 or 9 when I started working for a company out of the United Kingdom called Sample Magic. And back then it was a very niche industry. If people bought samples, it was usually for the production of like house music or very specific electronic styles of music. And, little by little, I started creating my own sample packs, and I started producing for that company, Sample Magic. And then eventually they asked me if I wanted to come on and sort of manage and oversee other sample packs that people were creating. And I was like, yeah, sure, But by the time I did that, I think I had produced about 80 sample packs with about 1,000 sounds per sample pack. So, that's everything from drums to synths to keys, all kinds of different sounds in each of these sample packs. And so I quickly became sort of like an expert in that field, since it was a very niche field. And then little by little, I think people would recognize, oh, that's John Kunkel from Sample Magic. And, eventually that led into me going into some bigger companies and working with some bigger companies, which eventually became Splice, which is sort of the world's leading sample pack company, which, they also do a lot of different other things. They have AI products, they have DAW and plugins and stuff like that, products that they offer. But I work on the sounds side still. And yeah, so I mean, it's a really fun industry to be in because it's still growing. There's still a lot of new sounds that are coming out every day, a lot of new companies popping up, and yeah, and I really love what I do.
That's cool, man. So that's pretty much your full-time gig. How many hours a week are you working over at Splice?
Well, I mean, I'm full time, so
Okay.
it can be anywhere from 40 to 80 hours a week,
Oh, wow.
depending on, like a few weeks ago, I flew out to India for 8 days and helped support a sample pack that we did. Actually, we did 9 sample packs with all these different musicians trying to recreate Bollywood, the 70s Bollywood specifically. So we went out there and recorded all these musicians, 25 different musicians over the course of 9 days, 10, 12 hours a day. Just, we were in Mumbai, just getting a lot of content in there. And, the sounds that we captured were really iconic. We tried to use a lot of hardware that was specific to early Bollywood music, right? So the very specific microphones that they used back then, very specific mixing consoles, techniques, how mics were placed. They have mics that we don't have anymore, or if we do, they're not really in circulation at normal studios, so you'd have to bring it yourself. But they have all that there. So we were able to capture this very vintage era of Bollywood music that you wouldn't be able to do in a regular studio in LA, which was really cool. So
That's so cool, man. Yeah, that's really cool. I hear Mumbai and India is pretty crazy. How was that? How was that experience?
yeah, I mean, it definitely took me by surprise. I mean, I grew up in South America, from 3 until 18. So I mean, I'd seen what other parts of the world could look like. I've been to Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina. I've been to the Amazon. So I've been all over. But going to India was definitely like still a culture shock in the sense of just the way that the cities are built. There's distinct kind of smells and vibes. The food is amazing, but you also kind of get this sense of like I'm really jet lagged and I want to see as much as I can, but I'm also in the studio all day. And so I don't know where like the coolest places are to go, but we had a lot of local people show us around, and I mean, it's definitely a place that is extremely has a lot of poverty, obviously, and there's also a huge poverty gap. So you definitely see that very clearly. We're literally at our hotel, and then across the street there's a Soho House, and then down the other street there's like a little shanty town or whatever you call them. And so it's very much like all at once, and it's all in your face. And in a way, I guess LA isn't too different at times, right? Because you
Right.
can be in like gorgeous area and then turn this way and you're in Skid Row and you see that. And so there is a lot of like parallels, but there's definitely like a much more realness that you experience all the time out there than you would in LA, where I think everything's kind of like hidden in certain pockets.
Sure, sure. And you're from Uruguay, correct?
Yeah, so I was raised in Uruguay,
Okay.
but I was born in the Bay Area. My mom's from Brazil, my dad's from Oakland, and so grew up in South America in Uruguay my whole life. So I mean, I consider myself culturally Uruguayan and Brazilian, and also a proud American as well. So it's really weird to really know where I'm at any given point. Usually the World Cup will dictate which one I'm feeling most strongest about,
Right.
but yeah, for the most part, I do feel I like identify as Uruguayan, but then also, American and Brazilian. So it's very confusing.
Yeah, I understand, man. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the new division, John. For the people watching, for the people listening who might not be familiar with the new division, give me a little bit of the history of the new division and how you guys came to be.
Yeah, sure. So when I was 18, I knew that I was going to be going to college in the States. I wasn't going to stay in Uruguay. And I'd gotten a scholarship to go to this school in Riverside, California, called California Baptist University. And so I went there, and I quickly realized that California wasn't what, the 80s movies made it to seem to be. It wasn't like there was going to be like all these, surfer people and skaters and stuff. Riverside is a very tough area in the sense of like, it's not the most glamorous city in the world. And so I think right away I realized that if I wanted to have some fun, I would have to fall back on music. And so that's immediately what I did, because there just wasn't a whole lot to do in that town. Most people were partying and drinking and doing drugs and stuff like that. And I wasn't really ever into that necessarily. So I decided that very quickly I wanted to start a band within like my first year at college. And so right around that time, I'd gotten really deeply into Depeche Mode, New Order, Tears for Fears, just a lot of 80s music. And I just purchased this Oasis Micron, which is an old synthesizer that is very basic, very easy to operate. And I just started recording a bunch of little ideas on there. And from there, I started kind of sharing demos to people in class and people around campus, and I was like, hey, check this out. This is like a demo I did. What do you think? And getting feedback from people. And eventually it landed into like the hands of people that would later become my bandmates. And, and they were like, hey, we love this stuff. Like, this is the kind of music we want to do as well. There isn't a whole lot of electronic music in this area. So like, I'd love to get into that. And I think that was also the reason why I wanted to do electronic music, was because at the time, most of the shows that I'd go to or venues, most of the bands were doing like screamo or metal kind of music, and which is all good and fine, but I just never had any affinity for it. And I always wanted to do something that was, just a little bit different. And I was like, there's no live shows with any bands playing with synths around here. And I was like, that'd be really cool if we could do that. And so we started doing that, incorporating synths and guitars and everything. And then that's how the New Division formed. I think there was like a battle of the bands on campus. And so I was like, this is going to be like our first show, And so I signed us up for it. We went and played it and we won first place, which was really, really funny. And I think that boosted our confidence quite a bit. And so we decided to book shows in Riverside at different areas. And then little by little, people kept on saying like, hey, like, we really like you guys a lot. Like, it'd be great if you guys played over here. And I think eventually we branched out of Riverside, went to LA, to Santa Monica to do a lot of shows. For some reason, the West Side just really liked us a lot. So we kept on going out to Santa Monica and playing shows out there. I think people were at the cusp of like, oh, electronic music is kind of cool. Like let's keep booking this band back and back. And then it just sort of organically just became a thing where we're like, hey, let's try to get this to be a little bit more serious. Let's try to figure out our branding, like what our album's going to look like and all that kind of stuff. And then that sort of took shape. And then, the rest is really just details and history. But, most of it was just people randomly meeting in college and wanting to play the same style of music. And it just kind of went from there.
So when you guys branched off and were kind of playing shows in Santa Monica, what year would that have been?
That was around like 2007, 8, and 9.
Okay.
We did do shows like the typical, the shows that usually ruin bands, when you play in Hollywood, like the Viper Room, the Roxy. And the reason I say it is because a lot of those shows you would have to pay to play. So back then there was this whole scam, which kind of still goes on now, but venues would basically tell you, here's 200 tickets if you want to play at our show. So you got to sell all those tickets and then pay the venue back. If you don't sell all those tickets, you end up owing the venue money. So there was a lot of cases where this happened to us too, where bands would actually have to buy those tickets. Then we'd have to go around and figure out, okay, who's coming to the show? Like, you try to get all your friends, your relatives or whatever to like, can you please buy like a ticket for $15? If we don't, we're going to end up owing like $1,000 or something. Right. And so in a way, it kind of made us hustle a lot more than if we hadn't. Well, let's just say that like if the venue was like, hey, like we're just going to pay you up front or not pay you anything, we wouldn't have hustled, but we had to hustle because of the fact that there was money on the line, right? If we didn't sell those tickets, we owed that money. So we had to bring people to these shows. And whether it was the Viper Room or the Roxy or whatever, that's really what we did. And in a way that kind of taught us like, if you want to get people to come out to your gigs, like you got to work and you got to get on the streets and you got to get people to like find out about you. Right. And so I think that was sort of like the motivating factor, so in a way, like the scammy nature of that kind of like helped us really propel and like figure out a lot of the things that we learned later on in terms of like how to make a successful show or, how to get people to hear your music and all that kind of stuff.
That's pretty wild, man. Is the Roxy and the Viper Room, did they act that way towards every band back then, or was it just towards certain bands?
It was just bands that were brand new to the
Okay.
scene, or maybe had no following, or if they did have a following, they didn't know about it, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this still happens to this day in certain venues. Like, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily always the venues. It's usually the promoter who has that night might do that.
Okay.
I mean, at the end of the day, the promoter is the one that decides how all that stuff works, because that's still the promoter's money, right? Like, they bought that night for the show.
Yeah.
So if they want to implement that system, they can still do that. There was like a venue in Upland. I don't remember the name right now, but they used to do this all the time, and they would advertise it, like, come play in our venue. And if you sell 100 tickets and then some, you'll get paid. Right. Whereas the typical thought was, oh, if you're a band that's going to play, you're going to get paid and whatever you get at the door, or if there's a guarantee, you get X amount. Right. But this was like, no, 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 no. This is like a loan for you to use our space. Here's the tickets. Now go sell them. And then we're going to count the tickets at the door.
Wow.
I mean, we would essentially hand them the cash, right? So,
Yeah.
like, at the end of the day, like, if we sold the tickets or not, they wouldn't care as long as we pay them, because we'd have a sign an agreement saying that we owed them money if we didn't sell out. So, yeah, it's crazy to think about it. And the way they called it was pay to play, right? That was sort of like the style of doing those types of shows, which a lot of bands, did that back then. It was almost like that's what you had to do. And looking back on it now, I'm just kind of like, that's crazy that you'd have to do that, right? And it kind of goes into that whole thing that, like, live bands don't get paid anything. It's like, well, we didn't even get paid. We had to pay to play.
Yeah. 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 That's crazy, man.
Yeah,
That's wild. What about the
yeah.
Troubadour?
We never played the Troubadour, but the Troubadour, I think, has a system similar to that, where you do have to pay in advance, and then you could lose money if you don't have like a high ticket price. I just had a friend who played there on Thursday, Ollie Ride, and I think they did really well. But I'm pretty sure that that's how that system still works for a lot of those venues. It's not. They wouldn't call it pay to play. That's just like, you put sort of like, you're basically essentially doing a deal with the venue to say that,
Yeah.
we expect X amount of people to show up. And then some venues might be like, okay, well, let's get an advance on that. And then some venues are going to be like, well, we trust you, but if you don't make up that, if you don't actually have that many ticket sales, then we won't ever book you again. So some venues are willing to take the loss, others aren't. And some venues also have a system in place where, if they're selling alcohol, they're going to make that money back, tenfold, but they also want like a significant profit, because in their minds, they could have just hired a TikTok artist who could have filled that space in 2 seconds,
Right.
and not taking a risk on you. Right. So that's the other thing.
That's pretty crazy, man. How did you guys do typically back in the day with that?
I mean, I think we always had 80 to 90% capacity. We've sold out a few times in those specific areas back then. For a band of our level and for the style of music that we do, it can be very difficult to gauge how many people are going to come out to an event, especially if it's like on a Thursday or if it's on a weekend. Also, what are the other people competing with you that week? If you're booking a show around Coachella, forget about it. Like, you're not gonna have the same turnout as you would if it was Stagecoach, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So it's always interesting to kind of see who's going to come out. But I think what we had at the time working for us was M83 had just released like Saturdays Equals Youth and all those albums that really resonated with like the public and the masses, to where they were like, oh, that band's really cool. M83 is not playing this weekend, but there's another band that's called the New Division that, kind of has some similarities. Let's go check them out, right?
Yeah.
And there was a lot less electronic music to choose from 10 years ago than there is now. Nowadays, I feel we were one out of maybe 200 bands. Now I think we're one out of like 2,000 or 2,500 bands that do a similar style. So, the options are a lot bigger. And so that means that people have a lot more choices to say yes or no to that venue. So, or to that band. So at the end of the day, you're really relying on your hardcore fans as opposed to people who might be interested in you. Whereas back then, we didn't have hardcore fans as much because we just were starting out. And so people were kind of getting to know us. And so we had a lot more of a pool of potential candidates to come and see us. Whereas now it's definitely a lot more like the hardcore fans are the ones that are usually coming out, and then maybe their friends that haven't heard of you, or people that just recently found out about you on Spotify. And it's also a generational thing. I think people 10 years ago were maybe going to shows more than they are these days, especially post COVID. I think a lot of people have more like anxiety to go to shows with all the recent stuff in the news with like, just bad things happen, and so I think a lot of people are just a lot more cautious about what shows they go to, if they even want to go out.
Sure.
So I think it's a different time. And I mean, 10 years ago I didn't have two kids and a wife, and I was kind of doing whatever I wanted every day, and now
Yeah.
I got responsibilities, and I can't just decide to go and see my favorite band on a Thursday or Friday night. So I can totally appreciate how your fan base ages and their options also become more restricted, right? And so there's sort of that metric that you can kind of probably chart pretty easily on a graph. But I think at the same time we've been able to have a lot of new fans come in into like the New Division sphere. And apologize, we have a little bit of a trash thing coming around right now. I thought they were coming at 7 a.m. and they came at 2.
You're all good.
But yeah, so I think in a lot of ways it's changed a lot in the last 10 years. And we're still exploring like what are the ways that we can reach our audiences that are new to this era,
Sure.
that were different 10 years ago. 10 years ago we had MySpace, and that was sort of like nobody was on Facebook other than college students, right? So we're not really active on TikTok and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
how many people are we missing out by not tapping into that, right? So there's all these questions that you get.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah. John, you mentioned 10 years ago, M83 was a band that has had pretty good success through the years. Looking back at it now from, say 10 years ago, maybe other than M83, who were some of the bands that you guys may have crossed paths with that have, kind of blown up, if you will, or have really made a name for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the bands that we crossed that might have blown up, not a whole lot. It's weird to kind of look back on it. Not a lot of those bands really play anymore, which is kind of sad. I mean, there are a few that still are around, but maybe they haven't released anything in like 5 years. But Shout Out Louds are one of the bands. Elephant. We did do a gig with Minus the Bear, but I don't know if they're still playing anymore. Also did some shows with, we did open for Peter Hook and the Light, who is the bassist from New Order. We also opened for Peter Murphy from Bauhaus in Mexico. We've also played with this band called Elephant, which was sort of like kind of like the Strokes in that area.
Okay.
Like a lot of those bands were kind of like at a similar level, but then only a few of them really skyrocketed to like massive success. And I think, we've crossed paths actually with a lot of really famous people now that I think about it. Like, we got invited to play a show with someone who at the time we just thought was like another singer-songwriter, and it turned out it was Lana Del Rey, right? We also had an opportunity to work with Charlie XCX. I actually did a remix for her and stuff like that. And then she just completely, blew up as well. So, but I'd say the vast majority of the artists that we ever really worked with or maybe shared the stage with at that point are long gone, or maybe just like on hiatus permanently. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, and I think as because a lot of those artists were taking record deals that were very restrictive in the sense of what they could do with their creations and so forth. Like I have a lot of friends who signed those typical 360 deals with Capitol and Interscope that were later told, you're not allowed to release any music for the next 5 years because we're not going to let you release anything, or because they have a quota and stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that, which is unfortunate. But yeah.
Yeah. John, you mentioned Peter Hook. I know Joy Division and New Order is a big inspiration of yours. I'm going to assume that's where the name, the band, the New Division, comes from. Is that correct? Did you take both and combine
Yeah,
them?
I mean, yes and no. It's kind of funny because the actual name came to me not because of like, oh, I'm going to join those two together, but I think what happened was is I was in an economics class in college, like I don't know if it was micro or macroeconomics, one of those two, and we were given this book called The New Division of Labor to read, which was basically this book about how computers were taking over the job market and what jobs were going to be taken out and replaced by computers and stuff like that. So when I remember seeing the cover, it kind of looked like the book cover looked like a Kraftwerk Tour de France or cover, and the way like the font was laid out and everything, I was like, oh, that's so sick. Like, I wonder if I could name my band that. And
Yeah.
so I ended up writing Peter Hook on MySpace back then, which I guess he was active on MySpace, and I even like screenshotted the picture and everything, like I saved it. And I said, hey, I'm a really big fan of New Order, Joy Division, and I just kind of wanted to ask your permission if you think it would be okay for me to name my band the New Division. And I showed him some of the music that I was working on at the time. And he's like, yeah, I actually really like the name, and I think your music is pretty cool too. He's like, you have my sample of approval. And I was like, yes.
Well, dude, he
So
actually
I ended up
replied to you. Really
Yeah.
cool.
He actually replied to me and said that the band name was cool with him. I didn't ask any of the other members from New Order because Peter Hook was sort of like the most approachable one on social media back then. But that was good enough. I mean, he was always my favorite member anyway, so I ended up just going with the name, and yeah.
That's so cool, man. When you guys opened for him, did you meet him, talk to him, chat him up a little bit?
Yeah,
Yeah, cool.
yeah, I've met him two or maybe three other times after that too, just by going to when they played in LA. I have a friend who was close with the whole band and stuff like that. So I've gone backstage a few times and chatted with him, and so he's one of my idols. So it was a huge pleasure to be able to open for him, and then kind of like continue meeting him throughout the years, and just every tour that they've done has just been so inspiring for me.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. Joy Division or New Order for you, John?
Well, New Order all day. I mean, I love Joy Division, don't get me wrong, but I think I would get pretty depressed after listening to Joy Division in and out every day. So
Sure.
New Order has like that good balance of like all the stuff that I love, which is like the synths with guitars. It's like one of the few bands that didn't go fully synth or fully rock, right? And they just had like that perfect mesh of like, you hear songs like The Perfect Kiss or Blue Monday and stuff like that, and there's sort of like this balance that they do, which is what I've always tried to capture with the New Division. That's sort of like, we're not like a fully electronic group like the Chemical Brothers, but we're also not like fully post-punk or rock or whatever. We're trying to mix those two in, and yeah, and so that's what I've always appreciated about them, and so that's why I would go with New Order.
Yeah, cool, man. What instruments do you play?
What instrument do I play?
Yeah, what instruments do you play?
Yeah, so I mean, I my first instrument that I really learned everything on was guitar. That's sort of like where I got most of my musical early chops in, and then learned keyboard a little bit. I'm still not really good at playing keys. I mean, I can play like all the basic chords and a couple of things, but I'm not really like able to play anything all that great. And then after learning guitar, like bass just came really naturally, so I learned bass and stuff like that really quickly. And then yeah, I'd say those are my three. Like, I don't really play anything else, just
Yeah.
synths, guitars, and bass. That's about it.
Are you self-taught, man?
No, 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 no. I
Okay.
had a, I had a, no, no. I had a professor, a guitar teacher. I had like three different guitar teachers. One was like this guy that just taught me like just how to like strum and do chords, and then I had another one that was like a classical guitarist. And then I had another one that was just like this friend who just taught me like all of like the indie stuff, because a lot of the stuff that they were teaching me, my other two teachers, was a lot of like, very like high level stuff that I was just kind of like, yeah, this is cool, but I want to play like, I was really into Oasis growing up. And so I wanted to learn how to like do those types of chords. And then I wanted to learn how to play like The Cure and all that kind of stuff. And so he was the one that kind of taught me how to wrap my brain around the stuff that classical music wasn't really presenting me with, right? Because classical was very much, well, you got to play with your hands like this, and you got to do all this kind of like, certain posturing with your legs and stuff. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to play like 80s music basically, and Britpop.
There you go, man. I dig it. I like it. John, can you play the bass and sing at the same time?
Oh yeah, I mean that's that. Yeah, I mean if it's not a complicated bass riff, I could do it easily.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you're asking me to play like a Duran Duran bass line or maybe something a bit more complex, then it would be hard. But if it's just like if it's like Oasis or gosh, I don't even know, like anything basic, then I could do
Yeah.
it. But if it's like the Smiths or maybe something that just walks around a lot, that could get complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what I heard, man? And you could probably shed some light on this. I have heard that Peter Hook cannot play and sing at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because now you mention it, I have noticed that he does usually have like his son
His
or
son
his
steps
other,
up. Yep.
yeah, or his other bass guitarist will do like the leads, which makes sense because a lot of the leads that he plays are sometimes accompanying the vocals in the song, or like they're maybe doing something like that. So I'm sure he could play like, if it's just like the low notes and it's just like one note at a time. I mean, I could see him do that easily, but it would be very difficult for me even to play like one of his leads and sing at the same time. There's very few people that like do that as the front man of their band, so
Yeah.
maybe unless you're Sting.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Smiths. Are you a big Smiths fan?
I'm not like the biggest Smiths fan. Like I like a handful of songs, and I appreciate a lot of their albums. Like I'm a big Johnny Marr fan, and I love Morrissey's solo albums, but the Smiths albums don't really resonate with me the way that Johnny Marr's solo stuff and Morrissey's solo stuff does. Like for some reason, I really appreciate them separate, but not together as much for some reason. I don't know what it is. I think it's maybe just like I'm not super into like a lot of like the melodic progressions or whatever, but it's not to say that like I dislike them. It's just not like, if I had to go to an album that I was wanting to listen to right now, it'd be like, Suede Head, or it'd be like, more, Johnny Marr's like 2015 record that he did that I love. I can't think of the name right now, but I would gravitate to that in a heartbeat over any of the old Smith stuff, because to me, the old Smith stuff is almost like too like Baroque or something. It's like very like, it's just a little too playful for my taste at some points, and it's weird because I really like the Clash, and the Clash are super goofy and they do a lot of stuff, but I always expect, like the Smiths to be like a little more serious and, that's like what I picture in my head. And then I hear their albums, I'm like, oh, this is actually very like playful, a little too playful for me at times. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I dig it, man. And a little bit, John, I want to ask you about some bands and get your opinion on the bands that I mentioned to you, but want to get back to the New Division. You guys have released, I believe, to date, what is it, 4 albums? Is that correct?
I think it's 5 studio albums.
Okay.
I always forget. And then a bunch of EPs and that sort of thing. Yeah, so I think the last one that I released was our 5th one. I can't remember the top of my head, but the last one called Modern Memories. Yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's 5. Yeah, I think it's 5. It's hard to keep up at the minute.
Yeah. Is there a point in releasing albums these days, or is it just better to release singles and EPs? What do you think?
I mean, I think that there's I think back in the 80s, like singles and EPs were really big, and that was sort of the way that they marketed, like the best songs. And one example is like, I don't think New Order made great albums. Like, I don't think their albums like as a whole are amazing, but there's something special to them that I keep coming back to. And yet their strongest songs were their singles. And then there's other bands that I can think of from that era that had not so great singles, but really great albums, like I'm thinking of like, obviously Tears for Fears, In Excess. And so I think that nowadays, if you're starting out and you're not really sure what to do, don't start with an album. Like definitely get some singles out there, see sort of what works. and try to find like your sound first before you decide to commit to a whole sound and put it out as an album, because I think an album is really like a way to showcase a story as opposed to just like a one-off idea. And so I think in that sense, like an album is just as important for like an author to write like a short story or a novel, right? And I think albums still do hold their relevance, and I think that people still want albums. I mean, they may not want to hear an album from a band they don't know, but they probably want to hear an album from a band that they really like, maybe 3 or 4 singles from, right? They want to hear like, what would it sound like for that artist to create a collection of songs in one body of work from start to finish. So I think in this day and age, it's important. I don't think albums will ever go away. I think it's how you tell the album, the story of the album, that's going to really resonate with people or not.
Yeah, yeah. You guys have released a ton of EPs, man, and a ton of singles. Do you know how many that you've released?
I want to say maybe 7 EPs and a bunch of singles. Like for me, singles nowadays don't really mean the same thing that they did back, in the 80s and 90s or whatever. Like to me, a single nowadays is just like, hey, here's a song that I want to put out that I don't really feel like putting onto an album, or it may fit onto an album in the future. I don't know, but it's really more about like the marketing and the promotion of like keeping the band active, as opposed to like, here's our single, the greatest song in the world kind of thing. Like that's not really the way I approach singles. To me, singles is really more like, this is like an experimental idea, or maybe it's an idea that I'm just really excited about that I'm not sure if it's ever going to be on an album or not, but I want to put it out there. EPs for me are really just like a way to play around with some really out there material that I normally wouldn't put as an album together, right? I think a band that does this really great is Nine Inch Nails. Like their EPs usually are like very different from their full lengths and stuff like that. And I really like that because it allows an artist to just kind of explore a different side of their music that they wouldn't normally be able to put out maybe on a full length like that. So, putting it out with like 3 or 4 songs, is a lot less commitment than going for like a 10 or 12 track album.
Yeah, sure.
Speaking of experimental music, yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense, man. Speaking of albums, one of my favorite songs from you guys is off the 2011 Shadows album. That song would be Opium. It's a great track, man. What can you tell me about Opium?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's fantastic, man. And I'm guessing it's a fan favorite because there's like, I don't know, man, somewhere around, I think, 355,000 views of it on YouTube for the video. So,
yeah, it's definitely a fan favorite. Yeah, I mean, there's not really a whole lot to say about it. I mean, I remember at the time when I wrote it, I was living with my parents. I just graduated from college, and it was like a weird time because that was back when like the recession had happened, and so like I had just gotten a master's, couldn't find a job anywhere, and it was just kind of like this, hitting up my friends like, hey, have you found a job yet? Nope. Okay, everyone's like, basically not, none of us have jobs, and it's like, why do we go to college for 6 years,
right.
like do everything right, and then and so you kind of get left into this sort of like defeatist position. And I think that song was sort of like a reflection on just a lot of people that I knew in my life who maybe didn't go like straight into heroin or opium, but had just kind of like given up and decided that like, yeah, all of that was a waste. Now I'm just going to smoke weed all day or get drunk or whatever, and not really try to like, try to really work hard to get something. And so I think that song was kind of like my observation of that. And I think a lot of the songs that I write, for the most part, are really just my own observations of like the world around me or of other people that I might know. I think a lot of people thought that I was going through something really dark when I wrote that song, and I'm like, no, I'm fine, dude. Like, right. I remember my friend's mom was like, is John okay? Like, I heard his song Opium and it's just really, it's really dark. Is he okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm just people write novels about murdering people. Doesn't mean they're going to go out and murder. Like Stephen King would be the, in jail by now if that was the case, right? So, so yeah, it was just really like a piece about just how I noticed that people were just not really at their best, and I figured, why not make a song that was kind of like a noir fiction of this guy who's just using heroin to kind of, say F it, I'm just gonna resign to the fact that nothing in my life is working out because this is easier.
Yeah, great track, man. Where'd you get your master's in?
Oh, so I went to school originally because I thought I was going to be a lawyer, but the minute I opened the LSAT, I was like, nope, not doing this. And I met a lot of lawyers who, because I was doing political campaigning back then. I used to work in politics for like 3 or 4 years,
Oh
and
wow.
I was a political consultant. And so, anyways, I was trying to get into law. Met a bunch of lawyers, and they were like, "Don't become a lawyer, become a cop." And I was like, "Well, I'll never become a cop, so I don't want to be a lawyer anymore," because their lives were miserable. And so I decided, oh, I know, I'll become a city manager. So I went to school for public administration. So that's what I got my master's in. And then, of course, when I got out of college with my master's of public administration, I realized that none of the cities in anywhere in the United States were hiring for any sort of position that would have like been appropriate for my career. So I ended up just working at a nonprofit for a while, doing like government relations work. And yeah, like I said, it was a weird time, and like now I don't even use my master's for anything
Yep.
at all. It's just like I spent like $30,000 to get a degree in something I don't even use anymore. So props to the
Yeah, right.
university.
That's great, man. Yeah, that's pretty funny, man. John, back to Opium. There was a video for Opium, a very good video too, man. You guys got some production value behind that video. What can you tell me about the video? Looks like it was cold when you guys
Yes.
shot it.
Yeah. So that was a video that somebody who was a fan who also worked in, I believe, was Joel Silver Productions, approached us, and he was very excited about the idea of like doing a music video for that song specifically. So he was like, "Hey, can you write us like a pitch, and all this kind of stuff for what you think the storyboard would be like?" And so me and this other guy, Dersu, came up with like a draft of what we thought would be a good concept for this video. And this concept was around this bunny being chased by a couple out in the woods. And so, oddly enough, the actors in that video, I think were like Disney stars at the time. It was Avin Jogia and Zoe Deutsch, who has been in a bunch of feature films and stuff like that. Really famous nowadays. And so it was just like this thing that just sort of happened, and they were able to fund it and do all this stuff. And I didn't really have to put any of my own money up like I usually do for every video, and it was just like almost like a gift. And they really wanted that song to go viral. They really tried their best to cast the right people. There was one point where Diego Luna was going to be in it, and the other guy from Mozart in the Jungle, Gael Garcia Bernal were also like two candidates to be in the video. And I was like, what? Like,
Yeah.
that would be amazing, because I was a really big fan of like Y Tu Mamá También and some of their other movies that they had done. And but the end result was amazing regardless. And and like they really tried their hardest to make that song go viral. And so I really appreciate what they did. And and I think it's obviously it didn't go viral, but
Yeah.
it's done well over the last 10 years, and so so be it.
Yeah. Where was it shot?
It was shot in, I think it was either Mammoth or Big Bear. I don't remember at the minute, but it was in one of those two places.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but it was definitely yeah, a snowy affair for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Another one of my favorite songs from you guys, off the Shadows album, and there's a video for it as well. John, it's a little bit morbid, man, and I'm gonna say that that song would be True Lies. So I'm not sure what you were thinking at that
Oh,
point in time with that video, but a great track and an interesting video, that's for sure.
yeah, I didn't actually have anything to do with the concept of that video. That was like a friend's idea, and he decided to make it about like student debt and all this kind of stuff. A little too like political for my taste,
Yeah,
but it was one of those things where he had gotten a few people from the Whitest Kids to be in it, and at the time we're like, yeah, this sounds like a great idea. And I don't hate the video or anything, but it's
yeah,
definitely not the direction I would have taken it with that song.
yeah. It's It's pretty interesting,
Yeah.
that's for sure. Uh,
Yeah.
John, with what you're doing and with the new division, is it easier with a label or without a label?
Well, that depends, I mean, it's easier if you have a label handling all of your merchandise, because they have a shipping house and distribution. But it's not easier when you want to do what you want to do. And I think the most restrictive part about being on a label is that they do dictate if you're not a major artist that has like complete creative control, they will dictate what you can do and who you're going to work with. I'd been approached by a couple of labels that wanted me to do some collaborations with people that I really didn't have any interest in collaborating with. They wanted me to do covers of songs that I didn't really want to cover. And so I basically was like, I'm not doing this deal. But you miss out on certain things like being able to play festivals and being able to do big collaborations and stuff like that. But I think at the end of the day, to me, creative freedom is more important than potentially blowing up for 3 years and then disappearing because the label kind of has a tight rein on what you can and can't do. And I think that's the reason why a lot of bands don't last, is because they do get they get presented with this glamorous image of what could happen if they get to play Coachella, or if they get to play FYF Festival or Austin City Limits, whatever. But there's always a cost. There's always a trade-off with those deals. And unless you're a very successful and established artist, before you sign that, it's going to be very difficult to have the cards be played in your favor. And I've always seen people that have taken those deals and be screwed over. I've never seen personally, from experience, somebody take a deal like that and actually come out successful on the other end, or have like something great happen. They do get like their 2 minutes of fame. They do get like, oh, we got to open for Depeche Mode or whatever, but it ends up not being the greatest decision in the world. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people that have great success by doing that, but I've always known that our band would not be one of those bands because our sound is too niche for mass markets and mass audiences. I always knew that like I didn't really have a singing voice that would be iconic in the sense of like maybe The Cure or Depeche Mode. I always knew sort of my limits. And so any label deal that would come and be like, hey, we think that you can be the next thing, I'd be like, well, I don't really think so.
Yeah.
And I know that you're probably trying to bring me in so that you can have maybe a percentage of money generated from my catalog if it were at like a mass marketed level. But there's just, some things that you just know to be true and real, and what the possibilities are. And I've always known that like this band, at least this project, will never be at the level of like someone like, Depeche Mode or anyone like that. And so, to me, it became very clear that by taking any of those deals, I would be very much controlled and told what to do, who to work with, and all that kind of stuff. And it just always seemed better to just be independent. And I've never regretted it. I've never regretted being independent. Like I would, if I had to go back and start the band all over again, I would stick by the decision to remain independent because everything I sell, every stream, I own 100% of it, and so I don't have to worry about any of that, and it'll be there for my grandkids one day, like they'll be able to have, if New Division ever blows up, after we're all gone, then, they'll be able to get, they'll have that in our family. So I think it's important to hold on to what you've created and what you believe in, if you believe in it to that extent.
For sure. Yeah, man, hard to get to the level of Depeche Mode, but how far do you think you can go, John? How far can you take it?
I think that we can definitely still grow substantially. It's one thing to be able to sell out the Rose Bowl with 60,000 people, like 2 nights straight or whatever they did. I don't think we'll ever achieve that. And I think also it's because, they were unique, right? I think a lot of what New Division is like derivative of that. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, but I mean that like, I recognize that the New Division isn't necessarily breaking boundaries in music. I think we're making music that appeals to fans of that era, so we're not reinventing the wheel. we're just simply doing music that we love to make. And if I was in the business of recreating or reinventing the wheel, then New Division would sound a whole lot different. And I would be a lot more concerned about different things. But I'm making music that I loved listening to when I grew up. I'm not trying to break any boundaries. And Depeche Mode and New Order, they were breaking boundaries. They were doing stuff that was like, nobody's doing this, and a lot of that has to do with the advent of technology. Like synthesizers were just coming onto the scene and people were just starting to hear these things. Nowadays, everyone's got a synth, right? So I'm not going to be the person to create something that has a synth sound that no one's ever heard. Like they're most likely people have heard it. And if they have heard it, or if they haven't heard it, they wouldn't be that impressed. Now we got AI, we got all these other things coming into like the field of competition and stuff. So my goal was never to be at their level. My goal was just to be able to create music that I loved first and foremost. And if there were people that came alongside me that appreciated it as well, then that's awesome, but I have still like a full-time day job, like I don't need the band to be successful in order for me to make a living. So I think not having that pressure of like, oh my gosh, like if we don't sell X amount of records, we're not gonna be able to like, feed our family this month or whatever. Like,
yeah,
that's a scary position to be in as well. And you got to remember, like there's only X amount of bands in the world that actually can or are at that level, and especially within their respective genres. It's kind of like, in Hollywood, there's like 30,000 actors, but only like 300 of them or whatever like actually generate substantial income, right? So
yeah.
It's one of those metrics that I always think about. And if I was trying to get to that level, I probably wouldn't be doing the New Division. I would be making pop music. I would be making stuff that was appealing currently to the masses, which is very easy to figure out what that is. I can just go on Spotify right now and listen to all those songs and be like, that's what I should be doing. Those are the people I should be working with. That's my goal, to target those people and those producers and those musicians.
Right.
So,
and you can do
I
that, right?
know what I need to do.
And you can do that as a music guy, right? Simple, right?
Easily. So, I mean, I have contacts in that world. I know people that work actively with major talent. The thing is that I've just never been, at least at this point in my life, up to now, I've never been that interested in working in that sound specifically. Now, if I were to lose my job tomorrow and I didn't have another source of income, I might be like, all right, it's time for me to put on the hat and start making some good old pop music, like here we go. Like, and I'd be totally down to do it, but
yeah,
I don't have to. So I don't have the same drive as maybe a 21-year-old who's just getting into the scene and is just really like gung ho about like becoming, Lady Gaga's next producer. Like that's not the world I live in, so I'm not really driven by that. I'm driven by doing what I love, which is like, I want to make the music that I like, not the music that is going to pay the bills.
Sure. Do you ever sit around though and think to yourself, man, I'd really love to quit my day job and really make the New Division my full-time gig?
Never, because that would be a nightmare. Making the New Division my full-time gig would mean that like I would have to be doing so much administrative stuff, a lot of logistical stuff with merch, touring all the time. Touring is not that fun. First off, playing shows is awesome. Playing shows back to back to back every other night or every night is not that awesome. So in a sense, like, no, I wouldn't want to do that. Just for the mere fact that I love being in the studio. I love creating music. I don't like necessarily having to be a brand ambassador 24/7 or a logistics person. I mean, when you turn it into a business, it becomes a business, right?
Yeah.
I think the way that other bands have done it well is they always had, like in Depeche Mode, Andy Fletcher was like the business manager, and maybe somebody else. I think actually U2 kind of had that model, right? Like, I think the Edge was doing like the shows, and then Larry Mullen Jr. was maybe owning all the merch, and then so Adam Clayton was doing like whatever else. So like they were able to do that, and they probably had like 5 or 6 other managers on top of that too, right? So if you have a system like that, then it becomes a lot easier to focus on the creative aspect and the music. But
Yeah.
I would have to hire, a full-time manager and all this kind of stuff. And, I just like making the music. I don't want to have to deal with, running a business. Like I'd much rather run like a tech business or something like that, where I know like, oh, I know that if this is successful, we could get some great funding and, we'd hit 50 million in 2 years. And that's a lot more exciting to me than like trying to make a band work, because there's not a lot of money in music unless you're doing pop music, especially if you're doing music that sounds like the New Division. And it's like, it's just realistically, like, it's pretty easy you can ask Chat GPT and it'll tell you real quickly how much you might be able to generate, so
Right.
yeah, it's not something I want to reinvent the wheel. And I know what bands can make, and it's a game of numbers and about being at the right place at the right time with the right people.
Yeah.
Much easier to start a tech company than it is to make a successful band.
Right. Right. So I'm guessing. So I'm guessing you'd rather be producing than being on stage. Is that correct?
Well,
Or
I
you like
like being
performing?
on
Yeah.
stage. I love performing. So I love being able to like get these songs that have been in the studio for 6 months, and then now we finally get to like put them out to the world and play them live. And I really get into it, but I don't get into playing really late, ending at 2 in the morning, waking up then at 6 to drive like 10 hours to the next city, and then doing it all over again. Like that can get really old really fast, right?
Yeah.
But I always look back on all of our tours that we've done with a lot of fond memories. And but you definitely do come back home after that's done. You're just like, God, I don't want to do that for another year. Like you really do come back with like this sense of like you just did a really big marathon and you just kind of need like a 2 month break. And it's not like we're on a tour bus or anything when we're going out. We're like in a 8 passenger van, and everyone's crammed up in there like sardines, and you start to get on each other's nerves. And some people probably partied too hard the night before, so they're really hungover, in a bad mood. And so there's all these different things that kind of come into it. But I've always been lucky to have bandmates, where we all just really get along well and we have a really great dynamic. And we've never gotten into fights on tour or anything like that. Like I think it's been really, really, we've been really lucky to have the people that we do in the band. And
Yeah.
so I'm grateful for all of them. And just, I think at the end of the day, like we're all brothers. And I think that having that be a part of it really helps a lot too.
Sure. That's cool, man. Very cool. A few more questions for you, John. Then I'm going to let you go. I know you guys got shows coming up in Texas. I believe your first show is July 20th in Austin, Texas. What can people expect from a New Division show?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of energy. It's funny, like we've had a few weird things happen where we've opened for other bands that were maybe like a little bit softer sounding, and then they realized they were like, oh shoot, we should have put them after, because we really play very energetic music live. It's very in your face and heavy and a lot of bass and stuff like that. It may not sound that way always on the albums and stuff, but it's very loud, and we have a lot of lights and stuff like that. So and we're not going to hold back, so I think my philosophy and our philosophy is we only get one chance to do this. Maybe never know if we're ever going to come back to this city again, so we might as well just go all out. And that can definitely take a toll on us. But
Yeah.
I've had incidents where like my bassist hit me in the head with his bass and I started bleeding on stage, and times where like I've fallen over on the drums. So I move around a lot, and all of us do. So it's not like a metal show or anything, but it's definitely like similar vibe in terms of like how much we believe in the music that we're doing, and
Yeah.
how much we want to like get the audience to that level.
Yeah. What kind of crowds do you guys draw?
So, it's anywhere from 200 to 250 to 400 people, depending on where we're playing and what night it is. But I'd say that for the most part, the people that come out are generally speaking, maybe like 25 up to, 70. Like we've seen a
Wow.
lot of different age range of, there's fans from the 80s that are, nearing 80 themselves, maybe, that come out and see us,
Yeah.
So a lot of people appreciate what we do because it brings them memories of, oh, I got to see so and so back in 1984, and you guys reminded me of that, kind of a thing, and it's like, that's awesome, that's great.
Yeah.
So
So
happy to hear that.
how do you guys land those gigs? You have a booking agent? Is that the way that works?
No, I mean, we've booked everything
Okay.
ourselves always. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, that's also the beauty of being independent, is like being able to decide who and when and where you're going to play, and get the deals that you want to get, having 100% control. We've never had a booking agent,
Okay.
never saw the need for one, unless we were trying to get booked, obviously, at like a festival, but never had a booking agent.
Gotcha. Interesting, man. Cool, man. I mentioned it earlier. I'm going to name off a few bands, few artists, few groups, whatever, and I just want to get your thoughts on whoever I
Yeah.
mentioned. So here we go. Pet Shop Boys.
Love them. Really bad single of With or Without You, though,
Yeah.
or a cover.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
A Flock of Seagulls.
Love it. Yeah, one of my favorite singles from the 80s is Space Age Love Song, and yeah, great band.
Camouflage.
Don't know them a whole lot, but I remember them sounding a lot like Depeche Mode, kind of wannabe kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yep. Erasure.
I like Vince Clarke, but also not like my favorite band from that era.
Gotcha. Time Cop.
Time Cop 1983.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, great guy, great music. Yeah, done a remix or two for him. Yeah, met him in person a few times. Great guy.
Yeah, very cool, man. FM84.
Yeah, another great set of guys. Just saw Ollie Ride the other night, and then Colin, who's the producer. Yeah, they got some great singles.
Yeah. And I dig your remix of Dusk by Lucy in Disguise.
Oh,
What about Lucy in
yeah,
Disguise?
yeah.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, also, like, I love his music. Really great to see what that guy's doing, and hopefully I can do another remix for him one day.
Cool. Last one. Well, maybe one more after this. Truce.
Oh man, he's the godfather of synthwave, in my opinion. My favorite of all those artists, in the sense that he did it so early on and just has his own sound, stayed with it. And I think he's got some of the coolest sounding synths from any album of any era. So yeah, big fan.
Cool, man. John, what do you think of After Dark by Mr. Kitty?
Oh, yeah. So I haven't heard that song, actually. I know who
What?
Mr. Kitty is. Yeah, I've met him before.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
So I know his music very well, but I don't know that one at the top of my head. If I
Wow.
heard it, I might know it.
You
Yeah.
probably would. 136 million views on YouTube for After Dark.
Is it in the last 3 years? Or do you know when it came out?
I want to say it's been out for a while, maybe 8 years ago, 7 to 8 years ago, I think.
Yeah, so
I
I
think.
probably heard it then. Yeah, I probably heard it then.
Yeah. You would, if you heard it, you would probably know it. So,
I probably do. I just can't think of it at the top of my head.
yeah. Cool, man. John, before we get out of here, any plugs, social media platforms, websites, upcoming shows, anything you want to mention?
Yeah, we're playing Texas in July 20th up until the 24th, and then we're playing Los Angeles September 31st. We're still working on getting some more gigs next year, and you can follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all at The New Division. Still working on our TikTok. We'll get there eventually, but not really a fan of it. And newdivisionmusic.com for any other updates. The New Division.bandcamp for subscription and exclusive unreleased songs. And that's pretty much all the places you can find us.
And dude, with everything you have going on, man, you'll throw up some how-to videos on YouTube as well.
I actually do have some.
Yeah, you do.
I got like 6 or 7. Like, these are how this is how like my production process works and that kind of stuff. So hopefully people will find that useful.
That's awesome, man. Well, cool, dude. I certainly appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on the show and talk to me and, share your stories. And yeah, man, it was fantastic.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I appreciate it, Cliff. And yeah, shout out to you guys. And thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate it, John. Have a great day, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. Peace.